Hi everyone, hi from chilly London. Today I wanted to talk to you about the Federal Reserve Bank of America, the Fed as we call it, and average inflation targeting. Now, before you fall asleep, it is very important and it's actually very interesting. Let's look at the words average inflation targeting. Well, we all nearly know what an average is, and we can talk about that. But the Fed generally had an inflation target of roughly, let's call it 2%. In the United States, the Federal Reserve Bank of America has what's called a dual mandate, and that is to keep unemployment low and to keep inflation, at 2% roughly. Other central banks like the ECB only have a single mandate, which is to keep inflation at 2% or less. But the Fed has moved away from the rigor of saying 2%, that as soon as inflation picks up above 2%, they have to raise interest rates. In other words, raise the cost of capital, slow the economy down, and take the inflation out of the system. What they're now talking about is it doesn't matter if it hits 2%, it's the average rates of inflation through the cycle that'll matter. Now, is that some kind of mathematical formula? No, it's a framework. In other words, framework means we'll make it up as we go along. So now I'm going to show you why this is so important. Okay, so here we have a chart of inflation so far. I'm using CPI inflation, so that's just inflation as you know it. The red line is that 2% that we were talking about. The blue line is inflation as it is, year-on-year inflation, so running roughly at 1.4% at the moment. Black line is that average we were talking about there. Now, at the moment, you can see there is no chance that the Fed should raise rates. We're well below the red line. And I've taken the beginning of the data from February 2020. So far, no chance that the Fed should raise rates whatsoever. But let's see what happens if we increase inflation by 0.2 a month. So that means a slow inflation rate that will eventually hit 2.4% year on year. Let's see when we would raise interest rates under the old scenario. So when you hit 2%, and under this kind of new scenario where your average inflation targeting, your average inflation should hit 2%. Now we have a similar chart. The red line, as you know, is the kind of inflation target, 2%. The blue line is inflation, and the black line is that trailing average. So what I've done now is I've increased inflation by 0.2 a month, and that means inflation will eventually rise to 2.4%. So the dotted grey line is obviously the forecast period, which I've assumed inflation of 0.2. So let's go ahead and have inflation go up to 0.2 a month so far in 2021. And what we find is roughly by June this year, the Fed can consider raising rates. Inflation suddenly gets above 2.5%, and it looks like inflation has gone above our red line, maybe raise rates. Even if they were more patient, by the end of the year, inflation is consistently above the 2% mark. But have a look at that little black line, it's still way below. And so on the old way of thinking, the Fed may have considered raising rates. The market might have even priced in a rate hike. But if we're focusing on the black line, then we don't have to worry about the Fed raising rates for now. But this gets even extended, this kind of idea, when we look at the next chart, taking this 0.2% a month even further out in time. Okay, here's the pièce de résistance. That's French, So this is the chart that excites everybody. This is what matters. Here I've got inflation again running at 0.2, and we can see the blue line, as I said, going above in June, going above by the end of the year. And so the Fed would normally be raising rates. But the black line is the trailing average, and look how slowly it moves. So despite inflation being 2.4% this year, throughout next year, at only by the end really of 2023 does your average inflation roughly hit 2%, and then the Fed raises rates. So it is absolutely clear under the old rules, by June this year, implying my 0.2%, the market might get a bit of cold feet. By December, the Fed would definitely be considering raising rates, and the market would be pricing in a rate rise either late this year or early next year. But now with average inflation targeting, look at the chart. It's basically saying by August 2023, that's some 2 years later, the Fed may consider raising rates because the average inflation is just about getting to 2%. So this delays the Fed in raising rates. This takes our anxiety away from us. It allows emerging markets to do well. We don't have to worry about the Fed. It allows commodity prices to do well. But looking just at averages has its problems, as is explained in the next clip, because also the variation of how inflation works could become very important.
But useful as averages are, they don't tell you the whole story. On average, Swedish people have slightly less than 2 legs. This is because a few people only have 1 leg or no legs, and no one has 3 legs. So almost everybody in Sweden has more than the average number of legs. The variation in data is just as important as the average.
So we've seen our average inflation targeting has moved the goalposts of when the Fed could possibly raise rates. This has caused the dollar, and I think one of the primary reasons the dollar's been weak. It's allowed emerging markets to do very well, commodity prices to do well. It's elongated the bull market in equities. But if the Fed gets cold feet, or at any stage we think this framework is not working, that is a game changer. And boy, the repercussions will be vicious.